Hello and welcome to your next tutorial in C++, and today we're going to be discussing inheritance. Oh my gosh, this is like the third take. The last one ended up being over 40 minutes, so I thought, you know what, this is way too long, and oh, what a waste of time too. But yeah, so that didn't turn out well. So I actually already have everything written out, and I'm just going to talk through it, because it takes way too long to write everything out. Okay, so exactly what is inheritance? Well, let's say in this example, you want to create a class of triangle, and well, all your objects are going to be triangles. Well, isn't it true that there are different types of triangles? There's isosceles triangles, there's right triangles, there's equilateral triangles. There's a whole bunch out there. So, basically, you can't represent the same object with the same information because the way you calculate things will be different. Now, is it true that the area of all these different triangles is half times base times height? Well, that's something that they all have in common, but how to find the perimeter of them is actually different. With an equilateral triangle, let's say, all sides are equal. So do you need to know all three sides? No, you can just type in one side, multiply it by 3, and then you have the perimeter. With an isosceles triangle, remember isosceles triangles are the ones that have only two sides that are equal, along with a base length. So you only need to know two of the three sides, one of the one that's equal, and the base length. So what we can do is actually create or use inheritance, in which we'll create a base class, or in other words, a parent class, call it triangle. Inside of that class, put everything that all different triangles have in common in there, and in each of the child classes, or in other words, the derived classes, you can put in all the specific information for that specific type of triangle. So as you can see here, ignore this. So all I did here in the main CPP is, do the usual stuff. And in here, as you can see, I'm using isosceles triangle as an example. So we're going to need a base length, we're going to need a height, and we're going to need to know one of the sides that are equal. So in order to find the perimeter. So knowing all of this information, the very first thing I did was create my base class. So what you'll do is you'll go to source files, right click, and add two new items. You'll add a triangle.h, and you'll make a triangle.cpp. So let's go into the triangle.h first. So the first thing I did was, as you can see, it's a base/parent class. This is the big guy that a bunch of other classes will eventually inherit from. So we did our if not define, and the end if at the bottom, don't forget that. Then we included IOStream and using namespace std. So then we made our class called triangle, and inside of this class, what member variables? So the first thing that we do is our public and private modifiers, access modifiers, and the first thing that we always do is find out what variables we're going to need. Well, everything that's in common between all triangles is the area, right? It's always half times base times height. So in order to find the perimeter of the triangles, do we need to know the height? Nah, we don't need to know the height. But we will need to know the height in order to find the area. So the one member variable that the parent class will have will be the height, because none of the child classes will need this variable. So I made a default constructor, and an overloaded constructor, and an accessor and a mutator all for the height. So if we go into triangle.cpp, you'll see that the default sets height equal to 0, overload sets equal to whatever we pass in, the accessor will retrieve that information for us, and the mutator will change the member variable with whatever we pass in, just like the overload. And then we have a destructor. Then I have one more function down here, which is the get area. And, well, we kind of have a problem with this. If we go in here, you'll see that in order to get the area, notice that I made it a double because we're doing a half here. That's going to be doing a half times base times height. Well, we're going to need to know the base. The base variable does not exist in this class, does it? We only have the height. So we're going to have to actually pass in the base. As you can see in the header file, I pass in an int there. And that's going to return half times the base that we pass in times the height, which is the member variable of this class, the parent class. So once we have all of that completed, we can now create our child classes. As you can see, I only created one child class. You can also do equilateral if you wish. You can do whatever you want. It doesn't even have to be this example. So over here, you'll add in another class .h and down here another class .cpp for that specific object. So the parent was called triangle. As you can see, the parent is called triangle, and the child one I called was isosceles. So we're going to isosceles.h, and well, the first thing that you might notice is that I included the parent class here, but you might have noticed way back in main.cpp I didn't include the parent class like I typically always did, whatever I made. So why is that? Well, if you include the child class, which then includes the parent class, you won't need to include the parent class. Theoretically, inside of the child class, you don't need to include iostream or std either, because inside the triangle.h, we already accessed them, but I do it anyways just to be safe. So, but you for sure don't need to do it in your CPP, so don't worry. Any of your CPPs. So I included the parent class inside of the child, then inside the main, I only include the child, or the derived class as it's also called. And, well, in order to make the class, what I did was I called it class, then isosceles, then in order to inherit from the parent class, or the base class, put a colon there, along with a public access modifier, followed by the parent class's name. And that will allow you to access all the public functions inside of this base class. So now inside of here, we can now see everything inside of triangle.h. So that's really, really good. And, well, we have a default constructor. This default constructor, all it does is, well, first of all, let's look at the member variables. We have a base variable here, so because we're going to need to know the base length. And for the isosceles, we need to only know one of the sides that are equal, since an isosceles triangle has two equal sides. Imagine it as a V, an upside down V, right? With a line connecting the bottom of the two. I don't know how to describe it. You guys know what an isosceles triangle is. So we only need to know two. So we have two accessors for the get base and get side 1. Then we have two mutators, set base and set side 1. And we have a get perimeter. And inside the get perimeter, we have, and a destructor, of course. For the get perimeter, all we do is return 2 times side 1, because this side's equal, so we can just multiply it by 2, and then add the base length. And that will return the perimeter for an isosceles triangle. And once all that's done, we have a print info inside the child class. And this function right here will actually exist in all of your child classes. So if you made an equilateral.h, that would also include the print info. It would include its own print info, and how it would do it would be different, of course. But inside of this print info, it'll print both the perimeter and the area. Now that is where it's going to get a little confusing, is how does it access the area? Well, let's just go to isosceles.cpp. In order to access it, notice how inside the print info, I just type out perimeter, and you access the get perimeter, which is right here, and that's going to return an int. So all it's going to do is print that. We've done that before. That's simple. But in order to get the area, notice how I just typed out get area, and with the base passed in there as a parameter. In order to do that, you couldn't do this if you did not inherit from up here. So if I got rid of this colon with the public triangle, if I cut this, notice that we'll get an area right here. Get area is undefined. So it can't see the get area in the triangle.h down here. So that's where the inheriting comes into play. So I'll paste that right back in there. And the area, the error went away. So that all works. So now in the main.cpp, I can, ask the user for the base, the height, and one of those sides that's equal. And here, as you can see, I'm using the default constructor. But we're going to want to use the overloaded constructor, right? Well, if we go into isosceles.h, notice that in the overloaded constructor here, we have 3 ints being passed in. That would obviously be the base, the other side that has a partnered side that's equal, and the height, so that we could find all the information. But inside this class, we only have the base and one of the sides that's equal, not the height, because that's in the parent class. So if we go into the isosceles.cpp, notice that I have in the overload constructor new base and new side 1, and I set the two member variables equal to what's being passed in as parameters. But how do we actually go about settling in the new height using the parent class? Well, one way that you can actually do this is right here. Throw a colon. So this means inheritance. So I'm actually going to go on to the next line, because typically you'll do it to the next line and then tab. So throw out a colon, which means to inherit, and then you can inherit any of the functions from the triangle class. So I want to inherit the overloaded, which is the triangle, right? From the triangle. So inside the overloaded for the child class, I'm going to inherit the overloaded from the parent class. So from the isosceles to the triangle. So I'm just going to type out triangle. And what do I do at this point? Well, at this point, all it's using is the default constructor. Because see, I have no errors here. It's just using the default constructor. But I want to pass into this parameter this new height. So notice what's going to happen here is, let me just pass in new height right here and show you how this is working. So how this is working is, oh whoops, this isn't capital there. There we go. So let me show you how this is going to work. So allow me to throw in all the pieces of information. So we'll have base equals side, and then it was height. There we go. Okay, so allow me to explain this. So we're creating an instance of the isosceles class, and we're calling it myTriangle. So this is our object right here, and we're creating it using the overloaded constructor of the isosceles child class. And we're going to be passing in the base, one of the sides that's equal, and the height. So we're going to go into isosceles.h. It's going to find the overloaded constructor and pass in those three parameters. And inside the isosceles.cpp, it'll find that same overload constructor, set these three variables equal to what we passed in here, and it's going to set to the member variables that's found in our isosceles child class down here, the member variables, equal to what we passed in, and that says minus there. That would be deadly. But we also need to initialize the height as well. So we need to use this colon symbol here that will inherit the overloaded function from the parent class and pass in the height. So we're passing in the height right here, and then we're passing it immediately into this other function. So now it's going to go to our triangle.h and find the overloaded function here that has one parameter. So triangle.h, one overloaded with one parameter. So then it's going to go to the triangle.cpp, set that new height, and set the member variable equal to what we passed in a whole bunch of times, because this thing got tossed in all over the place. So that's really confusing. But just watch this again, or maybe one or two more times, and I think that'll sink in. It is a bit complicated, but yeah, that's how it's working. So now we can set all three of these for this myTriangle. So now that we have that, let's actually try to, well, print all the information out. So we created that, and is that all I really wanted to do? I guess that's all I wanted to do, for now. So next I'll do a cout and line just in case, and let's actually print my isosceles information. So I'll type out myTriangle, since that's the name of my object, dot, and then print info. So let's see how this works. So I click save, and using the print info, that should print everything for me. Oh, I hit the F5, sorry about that. And you know what? I got a warning, so operator has no effect. So isosceles.cpp, line 30. Oh, that's an equal sign. There we go. So I guess I accidentally put a minus somewhere else as well. Okay, so again, that's going to be Control F5, not just F5. There we go. So please type in a base length for the triangle. So let's make that a 4. Please type in a height. Let's make that 3. And type in a length of the side that's equal. Let's make that 5. So let's look at this. So I'm actually going to write this out here. Where's a pencil? I need a pencil. Give me just a second. Okay, got a pencil. So let me write this out. So let's see if it found all this information correctly. So we have for the perimeter, how that works is, did I spell perimeter? Okay, I did spell it right. So how that works is it's going to take the base length, that's 4, and a side that's equal 5. And since in an isosceles triangle, since there's two sides that are equal, there's going to be two 5s. So 5 plus 5 is equal to 10. And then it's going to add that 4 from the base length, and that gives 14. So it gave the perimeter correctly. And then for the area, that's just half times base times height. So half times base, so basically we can just go 4 times 3 is 12, right? And then divide that in half to get 6. Or you can just go half times base, which is just 4 divided by 2 to 2. 2 times 3 is 6. So it founded everything correctly. Now there's one more thing I need to talk to you guys about, and that's another public access, or excuse me, another access modifier inside of a class. Notice that here in the isosceles.cpp, right here I use this to inherit the function here, the overload function. And this is probably the better way to do it because it looks more professional and it keeps you from using what I'm going to show you, because you typically won't use the protected keyword, which is what I'm going to show you next for inheritance. Usually you won't use that because I guess programmers typically look at that as the easy way out. It makes things easier. You don't know how to pass things. So I would try avoiding at all costs using the protected keyword, but I'll show you anyways. So I'm going to show you how you can use the protected keyword in order to access the either the overloaded or the mutator. I'm going to show you how to use the mutator. So how about that? So yeah, you can't use the overload. You can't do that in the overloaded. I'm going to throw the mutator inside protected. So you remember this public and this private? Well, what if you would like to be able to access, let's say you want to access the height variable. Actually, let me show you something really quickly that I want to show you something about the public. I want to show you the access modifiers in action. So let's go to the main CPP here, and let's actually see if we can change any of the variables inside of our object manually. So notice how I can show you encapsulation at work. So let's try accessing the height or one of the others. So if before we go to the myprint.info, let's actually go up here, type out my triangle dot, and let's go height, and set that equal to, let's say 5 or something, or let's make it 9. I don't know. And as you can see down here, I think I showed this to you before. The member triangle height is inaccessible. So that's because it's private. But if I make this height here, if I go, if I cut this, and let's say I paste it up here, I have no more errors. You can now manually set the height variable equal to something. So that's actually really, really bad. So I'm going to actually cut this again and paste it back down here so that you can't access it that way. So you don't want to make, but if you made that public, if you were able to make that public, what you could do is inside of your child header, or excuse me, inside of here, instead of using this modifier right here, or excuse me, inheriting the overloaded constructor, what you could do is just get rid of all of this, and can't you just go height is equal to new height? No. Notice how it still says the member triangle height is inaccessible. So even though we're inheriting from this parent triangle into isosceles, inside isosceles.cpp, it still can't look at any private variables or even private functions as well, if there were any, inside of the parent class. So what you could do is actually create a third public a third, I always want to call them public access modifiers. I mean access modifiers. And this one is called protected. I have to spell it right. There we go. Now what does protected mean? Well, let's find out. Let me actually cut all of this and paste them all under protected, like that. So if I go into protected, let's actually go in. Oh, look at that. It shows you the error went away. So as you can see here, now we can actually access the height. But does that also mean in the main CPP, can I access the height out here? Let's find out. Dot height, height is equal to 9. No, it's still underlined. Notice how the member triangle height is inaccessible in the main CPP, but for some reason in the isosceles.cpp, we can still access the height. Now why is that? Well, going back to the triangle.h, when you make a variable protected, that basically means it's public to all classes that inherit from it. So isosceles inherits from triangle. As you can see in the isosceles.h, isosceles inherits from triangle. So it can now use the height or anything else that's protected. But the main does not inherit from it. So we can't modify it like this. So you can take the easy way out really and just do it that way. But I wouldn't recommend it. I've been told that, and I do have real programmer friends, so I've been told to avoid using protected, to do it the way I showed you before. But yeah, either way it works. So I just wanted to point that out for you. So typically you'll still do it this way. Let me just get rid of this and go back to isosceles here, and all you would do again is just colon inherit the parents overloaded constructor, which is just triangle with a single int, and we're going to be passing in the new height, and that would still accomplish the very same thing. So, and that means I can just get rid of this here. So I wanted to point that out, that you can also use the protected keyword. But other than that, I hope this tutorial was helpful for you. I know that this was really complicated, but yeah, I would actually avoid using the protected keyword. But if you need to, use it. If no one's telling you otherwise, if you have a job somewhere and they use it, obviously you can too, but sometimes they want you to avoid using the protected keyword. But that's just so you know what the protected access modifier does. Any functions or variables that are in there, they can be used inside of another class that inherits from it. So that's it. So I hope this tutorial was helpful for you, and I'll see you next time.